Ian Shiskin, Cherdian Sokolov, Cromwell Stingwood, and Martifar Herrick were among the greatest magicians to leave a lasting mark on the history of magic. Their theories became foundational teachings for apprentices, and even those who did not pursue the path of magic studied their remarkable achievements. For centuries, their very existence elevated the empire's status, and they were revered as its heroes. Inside the imperial family library of Renelmus Academy, students were quietly immersed in their studies. However, hidden among the shelves was a special book, a talking grimoire named Grimoire. As Grimoire observed the students reading about the so-called heroes of the world, he grew furious. Having lived for centuries, the grimoire knew the truth. The heroes everyone revered were, in reality, talentless fools. It wasn't their innate abilities that earned them such high status, but rather Grimoire's guidance and power that had elevated them to the rank of hero and garnered them respect from all. Grimoire recalled the immense effort it took to elevate those so-called heroes to the status of great magicians. He remembered the tedious process of studying each candidate, choosing the right person to teach, guiding them through every step, and grooming them into powerful heroes. Yet now, none of that mattered to Grimoire anymore. All he longed for was for someone to pick him up, to free him from the dusty shelf where he had languished for many years. Grimoire had once been human, living on Earth, but misfortune struck when, on his way home from work, he was hit by Truck-Kun while crossing the road, ending his life. Unlike the lucky few who reincarnate as heroes or overpowered beings, Grimoire wasn't so fortunate. While he had read novels about people being reborn into powerful new lives, he found himself reincarnated as a book in another world. However, despite being just a book, he possessed immense magical knowledge. At first, Grimoire was confused. Why had he, of all people, been turned into a book, and why was he so unlucky? Yet, amid all the misfortune, there was one thing he found both interesting and enjoyable. Even as a mere book, Grimoire had the power to raise magicians. Raising an exceptional magician was easy for Grimoire. All a magician had to do was open him, and simply by reading, they would gain immense magical knowledge and power. In addition to this, they would acquire various abilities to help them in battle. In that moment, Grimoire recalled the countless magicians he had trained, as well as the struggles he endured while guiding them. For thousands of years, armed with his vast knowledge and theories, Grimoire had trained numerous disciples. Teaching them was his only source of relief from the stress of his existence, for as a mere book, if no one used him, he would remain forgotten on a dusty shelf, condemned to a lonely and purposeless life. Now, Grimoire was filled with questions about why he was languishing in the library, unused despite his ability to bestow incredible powers upon anyone who would read him. Each time, he had to find new apprentices, only to watch them age and die, leaving him to repeat the cycle endlessly. It had been 300 years since Grimoire last trained a magician, and he was growing increasingly frustrated and angry. He longed to train someone again to relieve his stress, desperately hoping one of the students in the library would pick him up and read him. Yet, his pleas went unheard, as only those who physically touched Grimoire could hear him speak. Just as Grimoire was desperately hoping for a student to notice him, a male student with glasses, carrying a large stack of books, was searching the area for a specific book recommended by the librarian. Seeing the student, Grimoire was filled with hope and tried desperately to call out to him, hoping he would pick him up and free him from the library. However, despite Grimoire's loud, frantic cries, the student could not hear him, oblivious to the book's desperate pleas. Grimoire's voice could only be heard by those who had fulfilled the contract or had come into direct contact with him, so there was no way his cry could reach the boy passing by. However, at that very moment, as Grimoire considered his situation, the boy retraced his steps and returned to investigate. At that moment, the boy, holding Grimoire, muttered to himself about hearing some noise from the area and wondered where it had come from. As he examined the book he was holding, Grimoire, thrilled after 300 years of solitude, realized that someone was finally touching him. However, Grimoire quickly reminded himself to calm down, collect his thoughts, and introduce himself properly to the boy. At that moment, Grimoire spoke, addressing the boy, who was startled to hear a voice. The boy looked around in confusion, unable to determine where the voice was coming from. He asked who was speaking and where the voice was coming from, as he couldn't see anyone. Grimoire spoke again, instructing the boy to look at the book he was holding. The boy then learned that the book was grimoire, a legendary grimoire. Still in shock that grimoire, the book, could talk, the boy listened as grimoire urged him to quickly open the cover. Grimoire promised that by opening him, the boy would surpass the ranks of apprentice, low-level magician, mid-level magician, and high-level magician, ultimately becoming a great magician. As the boy opened grimoire, the book emitted a golden light, and hundreds of pages flew out, surrounding him in a mesmerizing display. At that moment, the boy asked what was happening. Grimoire explained that what he had just seen was a glimpse of the journey he would experience if he joined grimoire. The grimoire assured the boy that his extraordinary magical talent would flourish immensely with grimoire's guidance, and he would become a great magician remembered throughout history. At that moment, grimoire thought to himself that he had been speaking complete nonsense. Upon examining the boy and sensing his magical powers, grimoire realized that the boy had no noticeable magical potential. Grimoire admitted to himself that he had been flattering the boy just to make him eager to read the book, hoping to escape the miserable existence he had endured in the library for 300 years. However, grimoire also reminded himself that he wasn't entirely lying. He truly believed that he could still help the boy become a great magician. At that moment, the boy sat down on the ground and abruptly told grimoire that, despite the offers, he did not want to become a magician. Grimoire was taken aback and asked why the boy was refusing, especially when grimoire could make him the greatest magician the world had ever known. The boy replied that he still had no desire to become a magician, even with grimoire's promise. Instead, he revealed that he wanted to become a knight. Grimoire was puzzled by this unexpected declaration. Grimoire, curious, asked the boy for his name. The boy replied that his name was Chaina Yunsbalia. Upon hearing his name, Grimoire exclaimed that Chaina was better suited for magic than for wielding a sword. Doubtful, Chaina asked how Grimoire could know which profession suited him better. Panicking, Grimoire claimed that he had been watching Chaina for a long time. Chaina, confused, pointed out that they had just met, making it impossible for Grimoire to have observed him for long. Grimoire quickly reassured Chaina that he had indeed been watching him closely. At that moment, Grimoire suggested to Chaina that he could become a magic swordsman. Chaina was puzzled and asked what a magic swordsman was. Grimoire explained that a magic swordsman was someone who could wield both a sword and magic simultaneously. Intrigued by this concept, Chaina excitedly responded that becoming a magic swordsman sounded incredibly cool and expressed his desire to pursue that path. Grimoire was pleased with Chaina's response and instructed him to open the book's cover immediately. He assured Chaina that, by doing so, Grimoire would turn him into a magic swordsman. Chaina agreed and opened Grimoire's cover, triggering the activation of Grimoire's magic. At that moment, Grimoire was granted the authority to teach Chaina, binding them in a contract that would last until Chaina's death. Grimoire thought to himself that his 300 years of solitude were finally over. He would soon leave the library and once again use his powers to train a magician. After a few moments, Grimoire excitedly announced to Chaina that the contract was finalized. He then loudly proclaimed that he was finally free from the shelves after 300 years. However, just as Grimoire was celebrating in his newfound freedom, Chaina suddenly had a change of heart. He told Grimoire that he had reconsidered and no longer wished to pursue magic. Jokingly, Chaina mentioned that he came from a family of knights and didn't want to be disowned by them. He apologized to Grimoire and informed him that he would not be becoming a magic swordsman. Grimoire, upon hearing Chaina's change of heart, angrily told him that being disowned by his family wasn't a big deal. He insisted that Chaina shouldn't fear his father or worry about being punished for learning magic. Hesitantly, Chaina agreed with Grimoire's words. Grimoire then added that if Chaina learned magic from him, he would become 10 times stronger than his father. He assured Chaina that if his father refused to accept him, Chaina could simply use his magic to handle the situation. Chaina was puzzled by Grimoire's remarks and asked why he would need to attack his father. He also mentioned that his father was not someone who could be easily persuaded. Grimoire, frustrated, responded angrily that he had waited 300 years to form a contract with someone, and now that he finally had the opportunity, it seemed all for nothing. Upon hearing Grimoire's frustration, Chaina suggested that he could introduce Grimoire to another student at the academy so a new contract could be formed. However, Grimoire, shouting in anger, informed Chaina that this was not possible. He explained that once a contract was made, a new one could not be established until the current owner died. Grimoire, enraged, began cursing at Chaina and demanded to know why he was only suggesting alternatives now. He insisted that Chaina should have either committed to the contract or not made any deal at all. Chaina apologized, but Grimoire dismissed the apology, saying it wasn't enough. He insulted Chaina, saying that someone like him, who was so insignificant, would never become a knight no matter how hard he tried. Chaina, infuriated by Grimoire's words, fired back angrily that Grimoire had no right to curse him, especially since Grimoire had been the one to impose the contract in the first place. He told Grimoire that, as just a piece of paper, Grimoire had no right to belittle a knight. At that moment, Chaina declared that the conversation was over and, in a fit of anger, placed Grimoire back on the shelf. He told Grimoire that if he could endure 300 years on the shelf, waiting until Chaina's death would be easy. With that, Chaina bade Grimoire goodbye and instructed him to find a new contractor after he was gone before walking away. As Chaina left, Grimoire shouted after him, insisting that Chaina had no right to treat him this way. Grimoire then attempted to use his magical authority to force Chaina to stay, but when he cast the spell, it failed to have any effect, and Chaina continued to walk away. At that moment, Grimoire despaired, realizing that his magical authority was ineffective against Chaina. He worried that he might remain on the shelf until Chaina's death. In his frustration, Grimoire shouted angrily at Chaina, wishing for him to die and hit his head on the ground immediately so that Grimoire could be free of the contract. As Grimoire voiced his rage, Chaina accidentally slipped on a piece of paper on the floor, causing him to fall and hit his head hard. The impact was fatal, and Chaina died instantly. Grimoire, witnessing the sudden and unexpected event, was left both confused and shocked by what had just happened. It took half a day to find Chaina's body. The boy was quietly attended to, and the library fell into a serene quiet by late evening. As time went on, Grimoire sighed, believing that he might finally escape the monotonous confines of the library. However, that hope was dashed. Grimoire reflected on his mixed feelings. He was saddened by Chaina's untimely death but somewhat relieved that it had spared him from the many years he would have had to wait if Chaina had lived. At that moment, Grimoire resigned himself to his fate and speculated about where he might be transported next. He wondered if he would be moved to a grand palace library, a musty underground slum, or perhaps a shabby bookshelf on a bustling market street. As he pondered his next possible location, Grimoire hoped it would be an improvement over his current situation. It was nighttime when Grimoire heard footsteps approaching the library. He wondered who would be coming at such a late hour. He then heard the person struggling to open the lock, not with a key, but by force. Grimoire initially suspected a thief but, upon closer inspection, realized that the skill involved in handling the lock didn't seem typical of an ordinary thief. As the door finally opened, Grimoire saw that the intruder was an academy student. Seeing this, Grimoire thought to himself that the academy might be a breeding ground for peculiar individuals. First, he had encountered an indecisive sword wielder, and now a thief. No matter how Grimoire tried to rationalize the situation, it seemed impossible that someone would be sneaking around the library at this hour just for fun if not for mischievous purposes. As Grimoire watched, he noticed the intruder searching through the books. Wondering what the person was looking for, Grimoire began to suspect that they might be searching for him specifically. At that moment, the intruder spoke softly, calling out Grimoire's name and asking where he was. Grimoire was shocked that someone was already searching for him so soon after Chaina's death, realizing he might be getting a new contractor already. Grimoire shouted loudly to the person, trying to let them know he was there, but his efforts were in vain as the person couldn't hear him. As the intruder continued searching through the books, she moved closer and closer to Grimoire. Eventually, she turned around and noticed a book that looked different from the rest of the volumes in the library. It was none other than Grimoire himself. Upon spotting Grimoire, the girl rushed toward him and lunged to grab the book. Grimoire, seizing the opportunity, urged her to take him and open him immediately. Just then, the clock struck midnight. As the girl opened Grimoire, she made a contract with him. Grimoire, reflecting on the moment, realized that it had been 300 years since he had ended up in the Imperial Family Academy, exactly 109,561 days. This was the first time in that entire period that he had encountered a second contractor within a single cycle. Grimoire was astonished that the girl had managed to enter the library undetected by the magical surveillance devices and evade the guards stationed outside. As the girl examined the book, Grimoire emerged from it and asked her name. The girl introduced herself as Riley. Grimoire, curious, inquired about her family name, but Riley replied that she did not have one. Grimoire was surprised to learn that Riley did not have a family name but decided to move on. He then asked Riley how she had discovered that Grimoire was in the library, noting that she seemed to know he would vanish after today and be teleported to a different location. Grimoire also inquired how Riley had managed to hear his voice at the last moment, despite them not yet having formed a contract. Grimoire explained to Riley that his voice was telepathic, audible only to those who had formed a contract with him. He added that unless one were a creature sensitive to magical power, like a dragon or a spirit, no ordinary human would be able to hear him without a contract. Grimoire was puzzled that an apprentice from the academy could detect such a complex magical fluctuation. Riley, upon hearing this, admitted she didn't know the reason and simply said she had heard Grimoire's voice without consciously realizing it. Grimoire was left bewildered by her response. Riley then explained to Grimoire that she had heard about an incident in the library and was wandering around when she heard someone muttering. Curious about the source of the voice, she followed it. Grimoire, however, remained puzzled as to why Riley could hear him before their contract was even formed. After a moment of contemplation, he concluded that Riley might possess a magical affinity comparable to that of a dragon or a spirit. If that were the case, it would explain why she was able to hear Grimoire. Grimoire, reflecting on the situation, considered that it might not be entirely out of the realm of possibility. While incredibly rare, some humans did possess extraordinary talent and potential, and Riley might be one of them. He speculated that, of all his disciples, Riley could very well become the greatest archmage. Grimoire then gently tapped her nose and introduced himself, stating, "I am the great mage Grimoire. I now understand the situation and am here to help you become an archmage." After a few moments, Riley returned to her dormitory, where she now stayed with Grimoire. Grimoire observed the room and noticed that, although it contained 5 beds, Riley was the only one occupying it. Riley explained that her other roommates had gone home for the vacation, leaving her alone in the dorm. When Grimoire inquired why she hadn't gone home herself, Riley revealed that she had no family or family name, so she had nowhere to go. Upon hearing Riley's explanation, Grimoire thought to himself that even commoners in this world typically had family names, so Riley's lack of one suggested she might be an orphan. He then asked Riley to clarify her situation further, as he would be guiding her and needed to understand her background. Riley acknowledged Grimoire's request and explained that when she reached the age of understanding, she had joined a thieves' guild. At that time, she had no personal name, and the guild members referred to her simply as Tool Number 2. There was also a young boy in a similar situation, known as Tool Number 1. To the guild members, Riley and the boy were merely tools, and they both followed this role since they had nowhere else to turn. Riley spent each day following orders, merely trying to earn enough to survive. She explained to Grimoire that working for a thieves' guild was far from ideal. Over time, she began to feel uncomfortable due to the unsettling stares from some guild members. To set an example and deny further advances, Riley killed a few of them. However, despite her efforts, the unwelcome behavior persisted. Eventually, Riley decided that her only option was to escape from the guild. After escaping from the guild, Riley was fortunate enough to encounter a high-ranking magician on the street. Recognizing her talent, the magician enrolled her in the academy, which brings us to the present. Grimoire noted that Riley's background as a member of the Thieves' Guild likely contributed to her ability to sneak into the library undetected. He then asked Riley if, given her unconventional enrollment into the academy, she had faced any bullying or mistreatment at school. Riley then told Grimoire that she used to be bullied when she first arrived, but that had since died down. She explained that a friend named Michael from the Bayluric family had helped her with the bullying, and now she no longer faced such issues. Grimoire, pleased with this, extended his hand for a handshake and expressed his enthusiasm for working together. He assured Riley that he would train her to become a legendary archmage. Riley, excited by the prospect, eagerly looked forward to their collaboration. However, at that moment, a loud noise echoed from outside the door, and a voice demanded that Riley open it. Both Riley and Grimoire were puzzled by the loud knocking at the door. The person outside demanded to know if Riley was aware of where they had been the previous night, implying that Riley had caused them trouble. Grimoire, upon hearing this, questioned Riley again about whether her roommates had indeed gone home for the vacation. He grew skeptical about Riley's claims of being bullied, as it seemed unlikely given that her roommates were now locked outside the room. At that moment, her 3 roommates managed to enter and glared furiously at Riley for what she had done. After a few moments, Riley was found lying on the floor, having been beaten up by her roommates for her actions. Grimoire, concerned, asked Riley if she was okay after being hit. Riley, however, assured Grimoire that she felt no pain at all, explaining that her roommates, having been raised like delicate flowers in a greenhouse, were incapable of inflicting any real harm on her, even if they tried. Grimoire then asked Riley why she allowed her roommates to hit her, especially given her strong personality. He wondered why she endured the abuse when she could have easily defended herself. Riley explained that her roommates were of noble status, and if she caused trouble, she risked being expelled from the academy, which she wanted to avoid. Grimoire responded that Riley had limited time at the academy, and if she let such individuals obstruct her progress, she would struggle to grow and fully learn magic, both from the academy and from him. Riley, concerned about her situation, asked Grimoire what she should do. Grimoire presented her with 2 options. She could either continue enduring her current circumstances while learning magic from him, or she could choose to drop out of the academy altogether. Riley realized that both options seemed unfavorable, but Grimoire insisted that these were the only choices given her current situation. She pondered whether a life of oppression with a guaranteed future at the academy was better, or if a free but uncertain life outside was more desirable. After much thought, Riley finally decided and told Grimoire that she would choose the second option and drop out of the academy. After a few moments, Riley and Grimoire were walking through the hallways, having just submitted the paperwork for Riley's withdrawal from the academy. As they walked, Grimoire remarked that it was somewhat disappointing that Riley had decided to leave. He noted that if she had stayed, she would have enjoyed various privileges, such as the special artifacts awarded during the annual tournament or the exclusive potions given to top students. Riley, hearing this, asked Grimoire why he hadn't mentioned these benefits earlier, before she decided to drop out of the academy. She added that he should have informed her from the beginning. Grimoire then asked if Riley was starting to regret her decision, but she reassured him that wasn't the case. At that moment, Riley turned and started walking in the opposite direction. Grimoire, puzzled, asked where she was going. Riley explained that the vault containing all the valuable artifacts was on the opposite side of the main entrance, so they needed to head back. Grimoire was confused by Riley's implication, but she clarified that they were going to steal all the valuable artifacts. Grimoire was taken aback by her bold statement. Riley then told Grimoire that with her talent and Grimoire's teaching, she was destined for tremendous growth. She declared that she would take all the valuable items in the academy and use them for herself, as they were rightfully hers. She reasoned that if she had stayed at the academy, she would have earned those rewards anyway, so she might as well take them now that she was leaving. Grimoire, reflecting on Riley's rationale, found her way of thinking rather unconventional. After a few moments, Riley and Grimoire arrived at a secret passage within the academy. Grimoire asked Riley how she had discovered these emergency exits, to which Riley replied that it was simply a matter of having the right knowledge. As they proceeded, they reached a crossroads. Grimoire inquired if Riley knew which path to take, but Riley admitted she was unsure. With a sense of pride, Grimoire announced that he would teach her a technique to handle such situations. Riley, curious about the lesson, listened as Grimoire explained that he knew a spell called path-finding, which would help them find the correct route. Upon hearing the name of the spell, Riley informed Grimoire that she was already familiar with path-finding, and had learned how to use it during her time at the academy. Grimoire then asked her to demonstrate her knowledge of the spell. As Riley activated path-finding, a blue light appeared, guiding her and revealing that the correct path was to the left. Riley inquired about her performance with the spell. Grimoire, observing her use of the spell, acknowledged that it was not bad and that she controlled it quite well. However, he added that while her execution was decent, the spell itself was rather ordinary and inefficient. Grimoire then told Riley that she shouldn't be confined by the rules set by mediocre minds. He added that Riley was far superior to those who had taught her the spell, so she should consider a different approach to using it. Instead of focusing her magic in one direction, Grimoire suggested she disperse it in multiple directions to achieve greater effectiveness. As Riley practiced the spell Grimoire had just taught her, she was impressed by the visible improvement. However, Grimoire reminded her that this was only the beginning and advised her to focus intently on her magic. He instructed her to pour all her attention into each magic particle, tracking them individually and visualizing them. As Riley followed his guidance, she was astonished to see each and every magic particle clearly. As evening fell, Riley and Grimoire successfully completed their mission, having secured all the valuable items from the academy. Grimoire congratulated Riley for her flawless execution, noting how she had completed the task without attracting any attention. He then told her that, with their mission accomplished, it was time for her to say goodbye to the academy. In that moment, Grimoire reflected on his own situation, realizing that after 300 years spent in the Renelmus Academy library, he was finally about to make his escape. As they gazed at the sunset together, Grimoire turned to Riley and said he wanted to clarify something. He reminded her that she had risked her life to find him and had even left the academy she was attending, all for the sake of learning magic from him. With that in mind, Grimoire asked Riley directly what her true purpose was in seeking him out. In that moment, Riley's mind drifted to her dark past and the life-altering incident that fueled her desire to learn magics, her thirst for revenge. Grimoire, sensing her hesitation, asked once more why she sought to learn magic from him. However, Riley remained reluctant to reveal the full truth. Instead, she told Grimoire that she had a goal she was determined to achieve, to become stronger. And the sole reason behind her desire for power was revenge. Grimoire wondered who Riley sought revenge against and briefly considered asking her directly. However, he decided against it, believing that bringing up past tragedies was neither helpful nor pleasant, particularly for someone like Riley, who had clearly endured a dark and troubled childhood. Instead, he chose to let the matter rest. As Grimoire pondered the situation, Riley broke the silence and asked if he had experienced something similar, if there was a deeper reason behind his desire to train magicians. Grimoire hesitated for a moment before replying that it didn't really matter why he wanted to raise magicians. But after a pause, he admitted that the true reason he taught them everything he knew, without holding back, was simply for his own enjoyment. He added with a grin that life as a book wasn't fun, so he wanted to make the most of his existence by finding joy in raising magicians. A short while later, they found themselves in an inn. As Riley sat on the bed, she asked Grimoire what their next steps would be, given that they had left the academy so abruptly. In response, Grimoire asked if she still had the recommendation letter from her previous academy's professor. Riley confirmed that she did. Grimoire then asked her to read out what was written in the letter. Riley took it out and read aloud, Irons's recommendation letter. Upon hearing this, Grimoire frowned, wondering where Irons was located, as he was unfamiliar with the place. Upon hearing the contents of the letter, Grimoire had hoped for a recommendation from one of the Empire's 5 great magic towers or at least a well-established one. He reasoned that if he had never heard of Irons, it must have been founded during the 300 years he spent confined to the library. Grimoire knew that magic towers were essential for magicians to build connections. Becoming a grand magician wasn't just about skill, it required a solid political background. A magic tower was the ideal place for that. Frustrated, he wondered what Irons was, as he had never come across its name before. As Grimoire pondered what Irons could be, Riley interrupted his thoughts, informing him that the Irons magic tower was, in fact, one of the Empire's 5 great magic towers. Grimoire was stunned by the revelation. Riley then sat down on a chair to explain further. She told him that, to truly understand the significance of the Irons magic tower, he first needed to know about its founder and master, Ian Irons. Riley opened a book to reveal a portrait of a man, Ian Irons. Grimoire, seeing the image, questioned why the book featured a portrait of Ian Irons on his deathbed, suggesting that a depiction from his prime would have been more appropriate. Riley interrupted, clarifying that this was indeed a portrait of Ian Irons in his prime. Grimoire was taken aback by this revelation. Riley then added that the portrait had been painted by Ian Irons himself when he was 40 years old. Upon hearing this, Grimoire asked Riley if Ian Irons was deceased. Riley assured him that Ian was still very much alive. Grimoire expressed disbelief, pointing out that the book stated the portrait was painted 300 years ago. Riley interrupted him again, confirming that Ian Irons was indeed alive today. Grimoire then inquired if Ian Irons was a half-elf, given their long lifespans, but Riley clarified that Ian was not a half-elf. Riley then told Grimoire that, despite only having reached the rank of high mage, he had accomplished feats that surpassed those of even an arch-mage. She explained that the academic community was currently debating whether to bestow the title of arch-mage upon him, as his achievements were on par with or exceeded those of an arch-mage. Riley also added that Ian Irons had single-handedly elevated the status of the Irons magic tower to its current prominence. Upon hearing this, Grimoire thought to himself that it still didn't make sense. 300 years was a long time, an eternity for someone who had been confined to the library, but not long enough to completely alter the landscape of the Imperial magic towers. Clearly, there was something Grimoire didn't know, something significant that must have occurred. He then read the book about Ian Irons and was astonished by its contents. The book revealed that Ian Irons had attained the realm of immortality and had been an arch-mage who elevated the Empire's status. For hundreds of years, Ian Irons had been fulfilling the wishes of his mentor, Marta Farheric. Grimoire, upon reading this, went pale, too stunned to speak, and stood there in silence. Grimoire and Riley had now embarked on their journey to the Imperial capital, and after a short while, they arrived. Grimoire turned to Riley and asked if it was her first time in the Imperial capital. Riley, her face filled with excitement, explained that it was indeed her first time visiting the capital leisurely and in broad daylight. Previously, whenever she came to the city, she was still a member of the Thieves' Guild. This was her first visit as a free individual. Seeing her enthusiasm, Grimoire suggested they take some time to explore the capital. As Riley and Grimoire explored the capital, Riley excitedly bought a food item from a vendor called Unicorn Skewer. With a gleam of enthusiasm, she told Grimoire that the capital was truly remarkable, as it sold meat from a divine beast. Grimoire interrupted her, explaining that while the skewer was called unicorn meat, it was actually made from lamb, not unicorns. Riley was taken aback and felt a mix of shock and disappointment, realizing she had been misled by the name. Grimoire, on the other hand, was amazed that Riley had genuinely believed the meat was from a unicorn. As Riley ate her skewers, Grimoire paused for a moment, staring intently at the statues scattered throughout the capital. Noticing Grimoire's focus, Riley informed him that the statues were of the 5 great magicians. She added that she had heard these magicians were incredibly talented geniuses with a profound passion for magic. Grimoire, however, contradicted her, saying that the 5 great magicians were not geniuses but rather total idiots. Despite this, he acknowledged that they were the type of people who would never give up. Riley was puzzled by Grimoire's strong opinion, wondering how he could speak about the 5 great magicians as if he knew them personally. At that moment, Grimoire asked Riley if she remembered her question about his purpose for raising magicians. Riley affirmed that she did recall asking. Grimoire then explained that his goal in training magicians was to transform them into renowned great magicians recognized across the world. He added that his motivation also stemmed from a desire for revenge against those who had reduced him to a mere scrap of paper. Grimoire then added that his disciples had endured numerous hardships in pursuit of that goal. He also revealed to Riley that Marta had been one of his disciples and had attempted to create a resurrection ritual for him, though she ultimately failed. Grimoire noted that, to his recollection, Marta had no other disciples, leading him to believe that Ian Irons must have been lying about Marta being his teacher. Irritated by Ian Irons' deception about Marta being his teacher, Grimoire told Riley that they needed to confront Ian Irons. He expressed his inability to forgive Ian for the impersonation and lies about his mentor, stating that he wouldn't allow anyone to take advantage of his disciples. Riley, smiling, offered to seek revenge on Ian Irons on Grimoire's behalf, in exchange for Grimoire's help with her own quest for vengeance. Grimoire agreed, and together they set off for the Irons magic tower. Thus began the story of how Grimoire and Riley pledged to assist each other in their mutual pursuit of revenge. About 5 years after Grimoire had reincarnated as a grimoire, he was stolen from a shabby shop by a boy named Findle, who was struggling to survive while wandering the slums. Findle became Grimoire's first contractor and gave him his name. To Grimoire, who was still disoriented from his transformation into a grimoire, Findle was a beacon of hope. Grimoire found joy in his days simply because Findle was by his side. Wanting to repay Findle for his kindness, Grimoire decided to teach him magic. Although Grimoire was teaching Findle magic, Findle struggled to channel his magic, having never practiced it before. Despite his efforts, he couldn't sense any magic within himself. Grimoire encouraged him to keep trying, and after a long period of persistence, Findle began to feel a faint sensation of magic. Grimoire was pleased and urged Findle to continue. However, Findle was struggling and complained that the process was becoming painful. Grimoire reassured him that this was a normal part of learning and encouraged him to endure the pain and keep going. Despite Grimoire's encouragement, Findle struggled increasingly with maintaining the magic. Grimoire told him to stop whining and endure the pain, emphasizing that learning to control magic was essential for receiving his teachings. However, at that very moment, Findle lost control and could no longer manage his magic. Grimoire, filled with worry, told Findle not to rush his magic, but it was too late. Findle lost complete control, and the uncontrolled magic struck him, killing him instantly. Grimoire was at a loss for words, devastated by the loss of his dearest friend, the one who had been a guiding light in his life. From that moment on, everything changed for Grimoire, and he was never the same again. Back in the present, Grimoire and Riley were traveling in a carriage toward the Iron's magic tower to confront Ian. As they sat silently, Grimoire began to address Riley, but he noticed that she had tightly closed her mouth, likely to prevent the carriage driver from overhearing their conversation, especially if it involved something important. Noticing Riley's caution, Grimoire remembered their mutual understanding as contractor and grimoire. He used a bit of magical vocalization to establish a telepathic link, allowing them to converse silently and secretly. This technique proved highly convenient, enabling them to communicate without being overheard. At that moment, Riley used telepathy to ask Grimoire why he hadn't mentioned this technique from the start. Grimoire, on the other hand, thought to himself that he had enjoyed the charm of Riley whispering to him in front of others when she wanted to share something privately. He decided to stay silent, knowing that if he explained his reasons, she would likely be upset with him. At that moment, as Grimoire was lost in thought, Riley, clearly furious, informed him that she knew everything he was thinking. She explained that, due to the binding contract between them, she could sense all of Grimoire's true feelings, even if he kept them to himself. Grimoire, realizing that his thoughts were exposed, became panicked and tried to avoid meeting her gaze, dreading the confrontation with her anger. At that moment, Grimoire shifted the conversation to the Iron's magic tower. He explained that, being one of the 5 great towers, it was certain to have a rigorous selection test. Grimoire advised Riley not to take the test lightly. Riley, curious, asked why she should be concerned since she was already seen as a promising candidate. Grimoire clarified that the 5 great towers were not interested in promising candidates but in magicians who were already complete and thoroughly verified. Grimoire then added that the selection test was a rigorous trial of merit. For Riley to be chosen by the Iron's magic tower, she would need to stand out and demonstrate her strengths among numerous other magicians. He noted that ordinary magicians often spend their entire lives preparing for this test, which is why it is also known as the graveyard of prodigies. Grimoire then informed Riley that she would be participating in the selection test this year. He emphasized that by the time of the test, she needed to reach at least the level of a mid-tier magician, and she had only 6 months to achieve this. Riley, concerned, expressed that accomplishing this within 6 months seemed impossible. Grimoire, however, interrupted her, insisting that it was entirely doable. He was confident in her success because he would be assisting her. Grimoire also mentioned that he had already prepared something to help Riley with the test. As time passed and night fell, the driver grew nervous as they arrived at an ominous location. He asked if this was truly where they wanted to be dropped off. Grimoire assured him that it was indeed the right place, and they got out of the carriage. As the carriage departed, Grimoire informed Riley that this would be the location for her training over the next 6 months. He also mentioned that it was the residence of Grimoire's former disciple. Upon hearing this, Riley remarked that if Grimoire's disciple had been his student, then they would be at least 300 years old, and she found it hard to believe that someone could still be alive after such a long time. Grimoire explained that while his disciple was no longer alive, he wasn't dead either. This puzzled Riley further. Grimoire then clarified that his disciple had become a lich, a state achievable only by a grand mage. He also proudly mentioned that his disciple had been a great magician in life. Riley, seeing only trees surrounding them, asked Grimoire where his disciple was located. Grimoire replied that he didn't know the exact whereabouts and added that Riley would need to find out for herself. He explained that locating his disciple would be her first test in the dense forest. Riley inquired about the significance of this challenge, and Grimoire elaborated that only those who could find his disciple would prove themselves worthy of learning magic. Therefore, Riley needed to find the disciple if she wanted to train under Grimoire. Grimoire then asked Riley if she remembered how to locate something, referring to the techniques he had taught her just a few days ago. Riley activated her magic and assured Grimoire that she recalled the lessons clearly. Determined to find the lich's hideout hidden somewhere in the forest, Riley began her search, as this was her first stage of training. However, as she cast her magic to locate the lich, she encountered numerous obstacles. Hundreds of magical barrier spells, illusions, magic distortions, and other complex magical defenses that the lich had set up to prevent anyone from discovering his location. At that moment, the lich, hiding far from Riley, thought to himself that even an advanced mage had taken half a year to find his hideout, so he didn't expect a mere apprentice like Riley to locate him easily. However, as he was contemplating this, Riley was seen smiling, having already pinpointed the lich's location. Riley's affinity with magic was truly at the level of a prodigy. At that moment, Riley had successfully breached all of the lich's spells and was now standing right in front of him. The lich was astonished and shocked by how quickly Riley had found him. As he was about to inquire how she had managed to locate him so swiftly, he began to cough, struggling to sound composed. Having not spoken for a long time, his voice was hoarse and he found it difficult to speak. After a few moments, once the lich had cleared his throat, his voice returned to normal. He resumed his inquiry, asking Riley how she had managed to find him so quickly. He noted that it typically took others at least 2 years, and even the fastest record was 4 months. He never expected someone to breach his barriers and locate him in under 10 minutes. The lich then asked if Riley had used a reverse tracking magic technique, a method only possible for those with an exceptionally high affinity for magic. Riley confidently confirmed that she had. The lich, taken aback, thought of Riley as a prodigy for her extraordinary abilities. After a few moments, the lich led them to his hideout. The entrance was guarded by various types of monsters. Once inside the lich's room, he offered them tea. However, as Riley sat at the table, she began to feel uncomfortable due to the strong aura emanating from the lich. Grimoire, noticing her discomfort, asked his disciple to tone down his aura a bit, as Riley was struggling to handle its intensity. The lich apologized upon hearing Grimoire's request and explained that he had forgotten to conceal his aura, having not met anyone for a long time and thus not being fully accustomed to it. He then toned down his magic and asked Riley if it was better now. Riley replied that she was fine. The lich then introduced himself to Riley, explaining that he had once betrayed the laws of the celestial realm and was cursed by the gods, transforming him into a being of necromancy. As a result, he carried the aura of black magic and had become a lich, a being that defies death. Grimoire then asked Riley if she understood why he had chosen to raise a new disciple rather than keeping a lich as his own. Riley responded that she had somewhat understood the reason. The foundation of a lich was black magic, which was strictly prohibited in the Empire. Devotees of evil gods, necromancers, black magicians, and even thieves' guilds had all illegally procured materials to practice black magic. There was even a specialized organization called the Inquisitions dedicated to dealing with those who practiced black magic and anything related to evil. At that moment, Grimoire asked the lich if anything serious had happened while he had been gone for so many years. The lich replied that, since becoming a lich, he had remained in the same place for 1,000 years. He expressed concern that Grimoire had not visited for nearly 300 years, fearing something might have happened to him during that time. The Lich then informed them that he had been researching necromancy, black magic, and curses throughout his solitude. He added that 5 years ago, he had to deal with a group of adventurers who had somehow managed to find their way into his hideout. Grimoire was shocked to hear that adventurers had managed to break through the Lich's barrier and enter his hideout. The Lich, however, suggested that the adventurers might have simply been lucky. He explained that the adventurers mistook his hideout for a dungeon because of the black magic aura. Upon encountering the Lich, they had charged at him without hesitation, forcing him to defend himself. Grimoire then asked what had become of the adventurers. With a smile, the Lich revealed that, due to a shortage of staff, he had turned all the adventurers into slaves, and they were now working for him. At that moment, one of the adventurers, now a skeleton slave, began serving them tea. Grimoire was stunned to see that the slave was a Death Knight. Shocked, Grimoire shouted at the Lich, exclaiming that the slave was no ordinary adventurer but a Death Knight, something that no regular adventurer could become. As Riley observed the Death Knight, she called out Grimoire's name and pointed to the sword at the Death Knight's waist. She noted that the sword's hilt bore a golden lion, indicating that the Death Knight had once been a leader of the Inquisition. Grimoire, upon hearing this, was furious that the Lich had turned a leader of the Inquisition into a Death Knight. The Lich, on the other hand, nervously and somewhat jokingly explained to Grimoire that he hadn't realized the adventurers were members of the Inquisition. He had merely fought off the intruders who had broken into his hideout. The Lich then explained that Liches often have their minds affected by black magic, which made it difficult for him to control his actions during the fight with the adventurers. As a result, he had accidentally turned them into his servants. Grimoire, reflecting on this, realized that he had frequently monitored the Lich's mental state and made necessary adjustments. It seemed that during the 300 years Grimoire had been absent, the Lich's control had weakened, allowing his powers to spiral out of control. The Lich then inquired about the specific reason Grimoire had sent Riley to train with him. He acknowledged that Riley was indeed a capable disciple and wondered why Grimoire had chosen to have her train with him. Grimoire agreed with the Lich's assessment but then asked if the Lich remembered his previous disciple, Marta Farhellic. The Lich confirmed that he did recall Marta. Grimoire explained that this situation was connected to Marta Farhellic, which was why he had brought Riley to him for training. After a few moments, Grimoire explained to the Lich the details of the situation. A fraud was impersonating Marta Farhellic's disciple, and Grimoire planned to enter the Iron's magic tower with Riley to seek revenge. The Lich, upon hearing this, questioned why Grimoire would go to such lengths to exact revenge at the Iron's magic tower. He suggested that it might be more practical for them to join another magic tower to keep things in check and still achieve their goal of revenge. At that moment, Grimoire admitted to the Lich that while Lich's suggestion was certainly a more practical and constructive approach, he found the idea of slowly dismantling Irons from the inside to be far more satisfying than taking the easy route. The Lich was taken aback, shocked by Grimoire's seemingly perverse approach to revenge. Turning to Riley, the Lich asked for her opinion on Grimoire's proposal and added that pursuing such a plan could put them all in considerable danger. Riley, upon hearing the Lich's concern, agreed that Grimoire's plan was indeed a very good idea and was excited about the challenge it presented. The Lich was taken aback, realizing that Riley shared Grimoire's enthusiasm for such a devious plan. At that moment, Grimoire interrupted the conversation, urging them not to waste any more time and to refocus on Riley's training. After a few moments, the Lich led the two to a different room, one filled with intricate magic circles etched into the floor. Riley was taken aback by the room's unique atmosphere. The flow of magic inside felt markedly different from outside, and she sensed an unusual sensation. The Lich explained that he had spent considerable time creating this space in collaboration with Grimoire. He added that while 2 years of training in the outside world would pass, only 6 months would pass by within this room, as it was designed to slow down time. Grimoire then pointed out that with only half a year remaining until the selection exam, it would be challenging for Riley to match the skills of an advanced magician, even with her talent. However, he added that by training in this room, they would effectively have 2 years of training time, as the room's time-slowing effect would extend their training period fourfold. This would give Riley the opportunity to maximize her training and better prepare for the exam. Upon hearing that, Riley complimented them on creating such an incredible space. As she admired the room, Grimoire pointed out that Riley now had two distinct advantages over other magicians. First, her exceptional physical abilities from her background with the Thieves' Guild, and second, her naturally superior magic affinity. Grimoire explained that moving forward, they would concentrate on these two strengths and focus on mastering just one type of magic. Grimoire then asked Riley if she knew how to use the spell Dispel. Riley replied that she had heard of it and understood it as a spell that neutralizes magic cast by opponents without the need for defense. Grimoire confirmed that this was correct. He further explained that Dispel was a counter-magic spell designed to dismantle other spells, meaning it could make a fireball flying towards them disappear into thin air. Grimoire then asked Riley if she understood his plan. Riley responded that she did and explained that Grimoire wanted her to use the Dispel spell to prevent opponents from casting magic during the selection exam, while relying on her physical abilities for hand-to-hand combat. Grimoire confirmed that Riley was exactly right and added that, regardless of how high the opponent's magic levels were compared to hers, her goal was to ensure that they could not use magic. At that moment, Lich remarked that Grimoire's method seemed a bit underhanded. Grimoire replied that it was the only way for Riley to effectively handle magicians in the selection exam and insisted that Lich would be responsible for training Riley in these techniques from now on. Riley, feeling a bit confused and worried, asked if they were going to start the training. Immediately, noting that they hadn't yet explained how to use the *Dispel spell, Lich then mentioned that he had assumed Riley had already learned about the *Dispel spell at her previous academy. Riley explained that Dispel was an advanced-level magic usually taught to students in their third year. Lich responded that it was actually advantageous that she hadn't learned it yet, as people often improve quickly with a few attempts. However, Riley was still confused, as she didn't even know where to begin with using the Dispel spell. After a few moments, Riley was seen lying on the floor, covered in bruises. Grimoire and the Lich both watched her, puzzled as to why her skill hadn't activated. Typically, a person's skill improves when they get hit, as they instinctively try to avoid getting hit again. However, Riley was lying there, battered by various spells, and she still hadn't learned how to use the spell Dispel. Despite being repeatedly attacked by the Lich's spells, she wasn't countering them but rather running away, and this had been going on for an hour. Grimoire began to wonder if there was something wrong with his teaching method. Grimoire reflected that although it had only been 3 days since he met Riley, he had already gained a good understanding of her personality. He noticed that Riley possessed an exceptionally strong sense of pride, leading him to consider whether he should say something she would find extremely difficult to admit. Since Riley had a strong disdain for failure, he reasoned that if he hinted at a weakness, she would be driven to overcome it, pushing herself to improve and learn the spell more quickly. Grimoire then considered that for members of the Thieves' Guild like Riley, failure was never an option. He wondered if the psychological pressure ingrained in her from childhood was still affecting her now. Perhaps, due to her fear of failure, she felt as though she had no choice but to run away blindly. However, as Riley sensed Grimoire's thoughts, she interrupted him, saying that he was mistaken. She admitted that she had only run away because she was afraid the magic would hurt her if it hit. Hearing this, Grimoire decided to dismiss his previous assumptions about Riley's feelings. At that moment, Riley explained to Grimoire that while she understood the principles behind the spell Dispel, she didn't know the method to actually cast it. Grimoire then reminded Riley that even though she might not know every detailed step for casting Dispel, he had already given her all the information she needed about the spell. Riley was puzzled by his words, but Grimoire urged her to think carefully about what he had just said. He pointed out that earlier, she was too flustered by the attacks to think clearly, but now she could approach the situation with a calmer mind. Still confused, Riley told Grimoire that while he claimed to have taught her everything she needed to know about Dispel, the only spells he had actually taught her were pathfinding and telepathy. She couldn't understand how these two seemingly unrelated spells were connected to Dispel. But just as Riley was speaking, she suddenly realized something. She then asked Grimoire if she was supposed to combine the two spells in order to cast Dispel. As Grimoire began to respond, Riley interrupted, saying that she now understood what he had been trying to convey. She assured him that she wouldn't ask any more questions about the spell. Instead, She was determined to use all the knowledge Grimoire had imparted to her, blaze her own trail, and discover the solution on her own. At that moment, Riley activated her pathfinding spell and began to search through all the magic formulas present within Grimoire's teachings. She was determined to unravel each formula one by one until she succeeded. After meticulously analyzing many of the formulas, Riley finally managed to learn the Dispel spell. Grimoire approached Riley and congratulated her on successfully learning the spell. Looking exhausted, Riley asked Grimoire how long it had taken her. Grimoire replied that 4 hours had passed. Riley, pleased with the time, thought to herself that she could have learned the spell within an hour if she had been in the real world, rather than in this time-slowing chamber. However, Grimoire interrupted her thoughts, revealing that 4 hours had passed in the outside world, meaning she had actually been wrestling with that low magic sphere for a full 16 hours. Upon hearing Grimoire's words, Riley dropped to her knees and exclaimed that time really does fly. She hadn't even realized she had been practicing for over 16 hours. Grimoire replied that this would be normal moving forward. However, Riley assured him that it would be okay from now on, as she had gotten the hang of it and wouldn't struggle as she had before. Grimoire felt a sense of satisfaction at Riley's newfound confidence. Time flew by relentlessly as the seasons changed one after another, and Riley practiced diligently every day. September arrived, bringing the cool autumn air when the sun began to set earlier. This was the time of year when the magical community focused its attention on the selections for the 5 great magic towers, and Riley had finally perfected the Dispel spell without a single error. The 6 months of training, which felt like 2 years to the 3 of them, had finally come to an end. Grimoire informed Riley that, at this rate, she could handle a mid-level mage with ease. Hearing this, Riley felt a surge of excitement. At that moment, Grimoire announced that their training for the day was complete and encouraged everyone to head back and rest. Lich chimed in, saying he would ask Jeremy to prepare a delicious dinner for them. Just then, as Lich spoke, a piece of paper slipped out of his pocket and landed in Riley's hand. Both Grimoire and Riley were curious about what was written on it. The paper revealed Lich's ultimate world domination plan, detailed steps for creating a Death Knight, and instructions for synthesizing a chimera capable of using magic. Both Grimoire and Riley were shocked to see Lich's plan for world domination. Fury welled up within Grimoire as he confronted Lich, demanding to know what the plan was about and why he was attempting to conquer the world while Grimoire was away. Lich attempted to deny it, but Grimoire wasn't convinced. He told Lich outright that he was completely insane for trying to bring ruin to the entire continent. Lich finally conceded, realizing he could no longer hide his plan. He admitted to Grimoire that it was all true, he was indeed trying to conquer the world. Lich explained that he intended to take over a small city on the eastern edge and establish it as his kingdom. He then made a fuss, asserting that a Lich of his caliber should be allowed to have such ambitions. Grimoire, however, was irritated by Lich's flippancy and expressed concern that Lich might cause even more trouble than he already had. In response, Lich jokingly insisted that he hadn't caused any trouble at all, which only deepened Grimoire's frustration. Around the same time Lich's world domination plan was uncovered, another conspiracy was brewing in the northern part of the empire. On the road leading to the city of mages called Wilhelm, a group of bandits lay hidden behind the bushes, watching a woman who was walking alone along the path. One of the bandits remarked to his boss that the woman's outfit looked expensive. He added that her stride was pathetic, showing no signs of caution, and that she appeared completely defenseless. Confidently, he told the boss that robbing her would be an easy task. The boss of the bandits quickly grabbed his bow and arrow, and in that instant, he loosed an arrow that struck the woman in the back, causing her to collapse lifelessly to the ground. The bandits rushed over to her and began to loot her belongings. As they examined the valuables, each bandit was shocked by the sheer number of incredibly expensive items the woman possessed. One of the bandits exclaimed that they would never find such riches even in a dungeon. Feeling fortunate to have stumbled upon this bounty from the woman, as the bandits celebrated their haul from the woman, one of them suddenly panicked and interrupted the boss, urging him to look in a specific direction. When the boss turned to see what his subordinate was pointing at, he was shocked to find the woman they had just killed standing there, glaring fiercely at them. Panic erupted among the bandits at the sight of the woman, who should have been dead. In a frantic voice, One of the bandits told the boss that all the treasures they had gathered had mysteriously vanished. In that moment, the boss of the bandits realized that the woman standing before them was a mage. He quickly ordered his men to draw their swords, insisting they were about to face her in battle. He added that, despite her magical abilities, they outnumbered her, giving them a chance to win. With determination, the boss drew his bow, aiming an arrow at the mage while declaring that she was merely a well-bred young lady. However, as he spoke, the mage smiled menacingly. Suddenly, she unleashed her magic, and in an instant, the arms of all the bandits were severed from their bodies. The boss couldn't believe that they had failed to inflict even a single scratch on the mage. Just then, the mage approached him with an evil smile and warned that anyone who dared to mess with a mage must pay the price. With that, she swiftly dispatched the remaining bandits. Moments later, a carriage rolled through the area, and the passengers gasped at the sight of the bandits lying dead on the ground. A mage in the carriage informed the driver that the fight had occurred about 5 hours earlier. He added that it would be more accurate to describe it as a one-sided massacre, as the bandits had stood no chance against a mage. The driver, looking concerned, asked what they should do about the situation. The mage replied to ignore it and keep moving. He suggested they report the incident to the guards once they reached the city. Assuring the driver that as long as he was present, they wouldn't encounter any problems along the way, the mage encouraged him not to worry and to continue heading toward the city. The driver felt somewhat relieved by this reassurance. As the man returned to the carriage, he noticed Riley sitting quietly opposite him, gazing outside. He asked her what brought her to Wilhelm City. Riley replied that she was there to take the entrance exam for the 5 great magic towers. The man cautioned her, saying that taking the exam could be tantamount to suicide. He explained that the selection exams attracted all sorts of mages, including lunatics who saw the event as a legitimate opportunity for murder. He advised Riley to have at least some skills to protect herself if she valued her life. The man continued, telling Riley that achieving a position in the lower ranks at such a young age was commendable, but he cautioned her that the tower's selection exam was likely more than she could handle. He suggested that it would be better for her to continue her training at a school in Wilhelm instead of participating in the test. Riley acknowledged his concern and sincere advice, but she firmly replied that this was a decision she had already made. Upon hearing Riley's response, the man sighed in regret, realizing he couldn't dissuade her from taking the selection test. He thought to himself that yet another promising candidate would meet a tragic end this year during the competition, and it would likely be Riley. Meanwhile, Grimoire and Riley exchanged puzzled glances, unsure why the old man was meddling in their affairs. They chose to ignore him and continued their journey to the city. After a few hours, the two finally arrived in Wilhelm City. Known for its perpetual snowfall, Wilhelm was also the heart of magical engineering. Riley was captivated by the city, marveling at the advanced technology she had never seen before. Grimoire, however, remarked that while the appearance had changed since his last visit, the atmosphere remained familiar. He then asked Riley if she had figured out the route to their destination, but she was still studying the map, looking confused. She admitted to Grimoire that she had no idea where to go. Grimoire expressed his frustration to Riley, noting that the city had changed so much that he no longer recognized the way either. He wondered why the location of the selection exam administration wasn't marked on the map. Meanwhile, a figure in the distance watched the two, smiling as they observed their predicament. At that moment, Riley activated her path-finding skill to determine the location of the selection exam. As she focused her magic, she informed Grimoire that there were about 10 potential locations identified as administrative offices. All of these were relatively clean buildings with restricted access for the public. Riley explained that the problem was that these could either be branches of the Academy's or mid-level research labs, and they had no way of knowing which was which. Grimoire then remarked to Riley that if he had known about this from the very beginning, he would have followed the meddlesome old man they had shared the carriage with. Riley reflected that she should have stayed close to the old man, even if it meant enduring his nagging, as she hadn't expected Grimoire to be this unreliable. Grimoire, upon hearing this, remarked to Riley that he honestly hadn't expected Wilhelm to change so much in 300 years. Riley responded that he should have anticipated it, considering it had been 300 years since his last visit, so changes in the city were inevitable. Just as they were bickering, a man suddenly appeared and asked Riley if she was new to the city, noting that it was his first time seeing her there. Grimoire noticed that the man was wearing a plump robe and had a hazy aura of magical energy swirling around him, leading him to realize that the man was a novice mage. The novice explained to Riley that newcomers to Wilhelm City often struggled to find the administrative office, adding that using the pathfinding spell was typically ineffective due to the residual magical energy from experiments and research interfering with such spells. Upon hearing this, Riley asked the man if there was another way for her to find her way. The man smiled and suggested that she could seek help from a kind-looking person like himself. Riley then turned to Grimoire, asking what they should do about the situation. Grimoire replied that it was up to her and what she wanted to do. Finally, Riley turned to the suspicious man and told him that she would now be in his care. Upon hearing this, the man asked Riley where she wanted to go. Riley replied that she was aiming for the selection exam administration. The man, impressed, remarked on how remarkable it was for someone as young as Riley to have traveled so far just to take the exam. He then offered to provide her with some details about the city, explaining that Wilhelm was a large city divided into several districts. As the man continued to explain the city, Riley interrupted him, asking how long it would take to reach their destination. The man replied that it would take at least 15 minutes to reach the selection exam administration. However, Riley quickly clarified that she wasn't asking about the distance but about how long it would take him to complete the spell he had been secretly casting on her. Upon hearing Riley's accusation, the man's demeanor shifted instantly to one of seriousness. He asked her when she had realized he was casting a spell on her. Riley replied that she had been aware of it from the very beginning. She explained that ever since they met, he had placed a strange emphasis on certain words and used a peculiar intonation, imbuing his speech with magic to secretly cast a spell on her while they conversed. Upon hearing Riley's words, the man burst into laughter and asked why she had followed him all the way here, despite being aware of his intentions. Grimoire thought to himself that the spell the man was casting was likely one of paralysis. If it had succeeded, Riley would have been completely immobilized and sold as a test subject to a black magician or an illegal slave trader. Grimoire understood that such occurrences were all too common in Wilhelm, where young victims like Riley often fell prey to sinister plots. Yet, despite this knowledge, Riley had chosen to follow the man, confident that even if the situation turned hostile, he wouldn't stand a chance against her. In that moment, Riley explained to the man that the reason she had followed him was that he didn't seem like someone who could hurt her, even a little. The man, enraged by her words, retorted that her arrogance stemmed from her recent entry into the lower ranks at such a young age. He declared that he would teach her a painful lesson for her insolence, emphasizing that even among those in the same rank, the disparity in skill could be as vast as the sky and the earth. He warned Riley that she wouldn't stand a chance against him. At that moment, Riley asked the man if she was his first target for kidnapping. He replied that she was actually the 13th. Surprised, Riley remarked that that was quite a number of kidnappings. The man, smiling proudly, claimed that everyone fell for his charm, attributing it to his so-called handsome face. Both Grimoire and Riley were taken aback that he considered himself handsome, as he was far from it in their eyes. The man continued, boasting that people often said he had a face that could easily make women cry. In response, Riley agreed, adding that he did indeed possess a face that could provoke tears, though not for any admirable reason, as he was simply too hideous and ugly. Upon hearing Riley's response, the man grew furious. He activated his attribute awakening, summoning a spear engulfed in flames. With a fierce determination, he hurled it toward Riley, intent on finishing her off. Meanwhile, Grimoire observed the man's control over his magic, noting that it was impressive for someone still considered a lower-ranked novice. A smile crept across Grimoire's face as he thought to himself that this would serve as perfect practice for Riley, providing her with valuable experience in combat. As the spear hurtled toward her, Riley remained completely unfazed. Thanks to her training with Lich, her dynamic vision had far surpassed that of an ordinary human. When someone like Riley channeled magic into her mind, she could do so instantly, without the need for incantations. In that split second, she activated her Dispel spell, effortlessly nullifying the man's magic and causing the fiery spear to vanish in an instant. The man, stunned by what he had just witnessed, asked Riley what she had done. She replied that she didn't know the specifics but added that what she had demonstrated was the true difference between heaven and earth. Meanwhile, Grimoire observed that Riley's attack differed significantly from the man's. Her magic lacked rotation, application, or tricks. It was simply a mass of magical energy, yet it moved with astonishing speed. In that instant, Riley swiftly cast her spell, True Magic Missile, launching it directly at the man. The impact sent him flying backward, inflicting severe damage that killed him on the spot. At that moment, Riley turned to the fallen man and declared that, as a token of gratitude, she would offer him a piece of advice. Being skilled in magic doesn't guarantee success in combat, as outcomes can vary greatly depending on one's characteristics and talent. However, as she continued her speech, she suddenly realized the man was already dead, rendering her advice pointless. Grimoire, meanwhile, was shocked to see that the man had met his end so quickly. He had hoped Riley would gain some practical experience, but instead, she had killed him. In desperation, Grimoire fell to his knees, pleading for the man's resurrection, but his pleas went unanswered. After spending the entire day searching for the administrative office, Grimoire and Riley finally arrived at the 10th building, which turned out to be the very one they had been seeking. Initially, Riley had used her pathfinding spell to check the 10 presumed locations of the administrative office. However, to their surprise, no one seemed to know its whereabouts. It was only after thoroughly inspecting each building that Riley and Grimoire were able to locate the actual administrative office. Grimoire couldn't help but think how obvious it was to find the administrative office, especially with the signboard hanging right at the front. He found it peculiar that Riley hadn't noticed it. Additionally, the office was neither marked on the map nor detectable through pathfinding spells, leading Grimoire to suspect that its location had been intentionally concealed. At that moment, Grimoire had a realization and asked Riley if she remembered the locations of all the buildings they had visited. Riley replied that she had marked each of them on the map. Grimoire then instructed her to mark this last building as well. As soon as she did, they noticed that the 10 locations formed the shape of an inverted pentagram. Upon seeing this, Grimoire realized it was a magic circle. He explained to Riley that the administrative officials had utilized the entire city of Wilhelm as a magical array, strategically placing special buildings at each point. They had activated this magic circle, which in turn triggered a spell of concealment, a magical barrier, or an illusion designed to confuse newcomers, making it as difficult as possible for them to locate the administrative office. Riley then asked Grimoire why the officials had implemented such a scheme. Grimoire replied that there was only one way to find out. They needed to ask the people in charge themselves. As they entered the office, they spotted a woman with red hair sitting in the center of the room. She looked up at them, smiled, and congratulated Riley, informing her that she had successfully passed the first stage of the selection exam. The woman then marked a pentagon-shaped tattoo on Riley's hand, explaining that it served as a token confirming Riley's status as a candidate for the selection exam. She added that displaying this token would grant Riley free access to Wilhelm's facilities. The woman informed Riley that the next stage of the selection exam would take place in about a week, advising her to rest well in the meantime. Finally, she handed Riley a list detailing the facilities available for her use. Riley took the list, reflecting on how easy the first exam had been, especially since she had passed it shortly after arriving in the city. Grimoire chimed in, noting that while visiting the various buildings had been tedious, it wasn't particularly difficult. He couldn't help but think that Riley was likely the only person to describe the first stage of the exam as easy, given her exceptional skill with the pathfinding spell. The buildings hadn't been marked on the map and were challenging to locate, even with the spell, and the fact that there were 10 locations masquerading as administrative offices had added an extra layer of complexity to the exam. Grimoire recalled that the woman with red hair had mentioned the selection exam administrative office would only reveal itself after someone had found all 9 designated buildings. While Riley had effortlessly navigated the challenges, tracking down each location and ultimately discovering the administrative office, Grimoire couldn't help but think about how daunting the search must have been for the other mages. For them, it likely felt like a hellish ordeal, filled with frustration and confusion as they struggled to locate the hidden office. As Riley made her way outside, the woman cautioned her to avoid any conflicts with other examinees before the next exam. Puzzled by the warning, Riley accepted it and continued on her way. Once outside, she turned to Grimoire and asked why the woman had made that remark. Grimoire explained that the warning likely stemmed from the fact that some examinees tend to provoke others in a bid to assess their abilities before the exam. The woman wanted Riley to steer clear of these troublemakers who might be looking to cause conflict. Upon hearing Grimoire's warning, Riley insisted that she wanted no part in any conflicts. Grimoire replied that even if she intended to avoid trouble, there would still be some individuals who would disregard the warning and seek to provoke her. Just then, as they conversed, both Riley and Grimoire sensed a sharp, menacing aura aimed directly at Riley. It was a familiar presence, reminiscent of the killing intent they had felt when they encountered the corpses of the bandits on their way to the city. Grimoire then informed Riley that the source of this deadly energy was likely the very culprit behind those corpses. Grimoire instructed Riley to use her path-finding skill to identify the source of the killing intent. After a few seconds of focus, Riley successfully pinpointed the individual emanating the dangerous aura. Turning to Grimoire, she asked what her next move should be. Grimoire inquired about her assessment of the person and whether she believed she could win the encounter. Confidently, Riley replied that she was certain she could defeat the individual. Grimoire instructed Riley to wait and assume a defensive stance. However, before he could finish his sentence, the assailant unleashed a powerful magic attack directed at her. Caught in a moment of indecision, Riley debated whether to dispel the magic or attempt to dodge it. Realizing that the spell was moving too swiftly for her to evade, she quickly decided to activate her dual-casting magic to block the incoming attack. In that moment, Riley resolved to place a barrier on the side from which the attack was coming. Although she anticipated that the barrier would shatter quickly, it would still create an opening for her to dodge while simultaneously preparing a magic missile. She intended to strike just as her opponent thought she was focused solely on defense. However, as she prepared to launch her attack, Riley realized with dismay that there were no openings to exploit. The opponent was completely surrounded by a magic barrier. Just as her shock registered, the opponent's magic surged through her barrier, striking her directly on the head. At that moment, Riley gasped, her heart racing as she feared she had died. Suddenly, the woman approached her and explained that they were engaged in a battle occurring within their minds, a mental battle. This simulation manifested in a state of extreme concentration, allowing one to detect the opponent, sense their killing intent, and strategize a response to the situation. In essence, it was simply a vivid delusion, a mental exercise rather than a physical confrontation. At that moment, the woman pulled back her hood and asked Riley if she had just witnessed death. Grimoire noticed that the woman was also an examinee for the selection exam, as she bore the same reversed pentagram on her hand as Riley. Grimoire then cautioned Riley to be wary of the woman, sensing that she appeared to be a truly vicious psychopath. However, right after the incident, Grimoire found himself sitting beside Riley and the woman, who were happily enjoying their meal. He was taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. The woman then asked Riley if the food was good, to which Riley responded that it was delicious. The woman proudly declared that this was the best restaurant in Wilhelm and that even the tower masters of the 5 great magic towers frequented it after the selection exam. With a reassuring smile, she told Riley not to worry about anything and to keep enjoying the food, as she would cover the bill for everything. Riley was both surprised and delighted to hear that the woman was offering to pay for her meal. The woman explained that she had been rude to Riley earlier, so she wanted to make amends by treating her to a complimentary meal as an apology. Overjoyed by this gesture, Riley excitedly turned to Grimoire and declared that she liked the woman. Meanwhile, Grimoire cautioned Riley not to get too close to someone who seemed dangerous. However, Riley replied confidently that anyone who treats others to good food can't be all bad. Riley added that her only meals had been terrible during her time living in the Lich's musty cave. Grimoire replied that the Lich would be hurt to hear her say that, explaining that he had put in great effort to cook for her, carefully balancing nutrients and using rare ingredients like magic herbs to create delicious dishes. However, Riley countered that it didn't matter how nutritious the food was if it didn't taste good. Grimoire thought to himself that Riley's comments were rather harsh. At that moment, the woman introduced herself as Rebecca Duncan, adding that Riley could call her Becky if she preferred. With a warm smile, Becky welcomed Riley and expressed her pleasure in meeting her. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.